And so I'm really fortunate to introduce you today to Ben Monnie. He is the Google's director for the Google News Initiative. And what's fabulous about what he's going to share with us today is a lot of benchmarking data. They've taken the reader revenue from around the globe and pulled it together so we can see some key insights that can affect what you're doing today. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Really a pleasure to address one of my favorite topics, which is digital subscriptions for news organizations with a great group of people, including the team at Mather Economics, who I've worked with for many years, including at Google, but also previously at my time at the New York Times, where I helped lead the strategy project, lead the strategy team, and I worked with Mather on a pricing optimization project for print. As you heard in the introduction, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've learned from our Google News Initiative programs around reader revenue. And just for context here, the Google News Initiative was started back in March of 2018. It's part of a almost 20-year long set of activities around supporting and working with the news industry. But we launched a program kind of to put everything under one umbrella called the Google News Initiative back in March of 2018, the goal of which was to support the long-term sustainability of the news industry. You see some stats here. These were collected and they are valid up through June of last year. So the numbers are significantly greater, but we've spent 189 million of essentially a $300 million commitment over 3 years. And we'd spent 189 million in the first 2 years with more than 6,000 partners globally on projects ranging from how do we essentially combat misinformation within the broader ecosystem to how do we essentially leverage technological innovation to advance the capabilities of news organizations, to, of course, how do we essentially evolve and develop business models with a particular focus on reader revenue. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the lessons we've learned in the context of reader revenue, but before, again, I do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we've thought about organizing some of our business model insights. And so what we've done is essentially interview and work with a lot of publishers over the course of those 2.5 years, now 3 years of the Google News Initiative. And we've worked with them to essentially focus on core aspects of their business, from audience development to reader revenue, advertising revenue, data, and product. And what we've done is we've tried to make that accessible and scalable to organizations of all types. And we put it under the umbrella of the G&I Digital Growth Program. And I'll provide the website to you at the end, but essentially this is easily searchable if you're on your computers now, G&I Digital Growth Program, select the region, and you'll come across these 5 topics. And what you can do is kind of click into each of the topics and you'll discover a series of playbooks, interactive exercises, workshops, and labs. And so the playbook we developed for reader revenue in context or in partnership with Mather, with Pete Doucette, actually, who you heard from Philadelphia Inquirer, with the Membership Puzzle Project, with News Revenue Hub, lots of experts that have worked on newspaper and news organization digital consumer revenue. And we pulled that together into a canonical point of view on how you can essentially build, grow, develop a reader revenue business. And we've done that for several of these additional topics. We've also launched interactive exercises to essentially help organizations think through some of the strategic and tactical questions and concerns they have. You heard the discussion about benchmarks. Well, we have included in our reader revenue suite a benchmarking exercise on the kind of 11 key benchmarks that are critical for a reader revenue business. And you essentially can enter your information based on your particular business, and you're going to see whether you're outperforming or underperforming versus comparable news organizations. And it combines that with a set of recommendations on how to essentially improve those. We also have a series of workshops, both live and recorded. We've gone through reader revenue. We've just also launched audience development and are going to be launching advertising soon. But all those are available online, and you can essentially participate over a period of time. Again, it brings to life with specific publishers, experts, and Google, the kind of lessons, examples, et cetera, similar to essentially this Mather symposium, but just spread out over a longer period of time, and obviously a slightly different take on things. And then finally, we have a series of labs, which essentially are cohort-based programs working with publishers and experts like Mather, who ran our labs program in Latin America over, frankly, 12 months with organizations to essentially get really deep into their businesses to drive meaningful progress and value. So because today is the subscriptions lifecycle symposium, I am going to talk to you a little bit about reader revenue, and in particular, some of the lessons. So what we know for reader revenue, and this goes back to the work we've done on our various labs with almost 100 news organizations, and with our workshops, which are more than 1,000 organizations, not to mention the time that I took helping launch the New York Times subscription paywall back in 2009 and 10, and then helping to grow that for my time for at least the next 6 years before I joined Google. What we know is really there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Every news organization has a different relationship with its users, with its community, and frankly, has different capabilities and approaches. All of those essentially, all that subtlety needs to be accounted for, and essentially taken into account as they develop their particular approach. However, we do know that there are some core principles. So I'm going to walk through the core principles with you, and I'll recap them at the end. So first core principle is about defining the market opportunity. And really, this is kind of putting your business hat on and trying to understand, again, what market are we really competing in, and what is the potential for number of actual paying users, as well as what's the average revenue we get from them on an ongoing basis. What we see all too often in some of our conversations with publishers is they haven't necessarily defined the right market opportunity or have used the proper data to be able to assess that. And so if you don't have that sense of what you're essentially trying to solve for up front, you're never going to be successful. So what we recommend is essentially 5 key metrics to be able to do this work. And there's lots of different ways to size the market, but one is just taking the number of monthly active users, getting a sense of actually what that growth trajectory is on an ongoing basis for those users, what your average revenue per user could be based on things like conversion rate and churn. So what percentage of your actual users are essentially going to convert to start on an ongoing basis? What's the average price, taking into account subscriptions, promotions, the bundle essentially that they're signing up for? If you have a subscription, you also want to think about what's the advertising ARPU that might be associated with potentially their increased engagement, and then what is their retention or churn. We have as I said, we have a tool that we developed, which again is not meant for the most sophisticated users, but is a really good way to essentially just estimate some of these numbers and frankly, play around with some of the relationships. The insight here, or the approach here, was let's think about designing something that's as simple as a mortgage calculator, or how much house can I afford, if you've seen those on bankrate.com or NewYorkTimes.com or other organizations, just to give you a sense of how much are we talking about here. This allows you to essentially enter your monthly active users, the growth rate, the conversion rate, and in this case, it's contributions as opposed to subscriptions, and then allows you to kind of move the slider around to essentially see what the opportunity is and what the kind of potential gaps might be versus where your baseline is. And again, part of this is understanding what the relationships are between and among the various variables, such that essentially you can set a clear target for yourself, understand this, and again, identify which priority variables you want to focus on. So once you've generally assessed the market size and the market opportunity, you need to start with understanding your readers' needs. So again, one of the kind of downsides, so to speak, of advertising for many years for the industry is that kind of our paying customer for the most part has been an organization, or has been advertisers who haven't necessarily approached the journalism in the same way that a reader would. Advertisers aren't looking to develop kind of loyalty on a daily basis with the news, comparing it with all kinds of different approaches. They have a whole other set of considerations. So with a shift towards consumer revenue, we deeply need to understand what our readers want. So what do they want? What do they need? What are their core behaviors in terms of news and content consumption, or news consumption, but also content consumption more broadly? One of the interesting insights from just the digital world is, when you're essentially introducing a subscription digitally and asking people even not to pay but spend their time with you, you're competing with not just other news organizations and newspapers, but with other digital services, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and the like. It's all part of essentially how do you fit within their overall digital diet, and how are you perceived in the context of people's willingness to pay for you. Likewise, how do they engage with your content, and not what and how much would they be willing to pay for your content. So we have a tool here that we would like to introduce, or we introduced to news organizations. It's essentially built on the back of GA360. It's called News Consumer Insights. And it essentially pulls in your GA360 data. It was designed specifically with news organizations in mind. And it breaks up your readers into 3 segments: casual readers, who are readers who read less than 2 articles a day. You've got loyal readers, which are between or not articles, but page views. Loyal readers, which are between 3 and 10, and then brand lovers, which are above that. You may want to check the specifics for on the website for that, but essentially it gives you a sense of what's your actual distribution by segment, how much are their page views, what percentage of page views are read by each of them, and here we have percentage of ad revenue, which is a proxy based on some estimates of RPM and the like. And this essentially gives you a really good understanding of, frankly, how your readers are broken up, and you can start thinking about potentially tying survey data to these segments by asking information about willingness to pay, as well as traffic to get a sense of, or traffic consumption to get a sense of, casual readers. Are they likely to be a good prospect for you to convert to becoming subscribers? What are their needs? What are their behaviors? Likewise, loyal readers, are they likely good prospects for conversion? And then brand lovers, which presumably would be your most likely prospects for conversion. What portion of them actually are paying for a subscription? For the ones who are, how do you make sure you're kind of surprising and delighting them on an ongoing basis, such that you retain them and potentially even can introduce additional value-added services or increase price for them? And then for the ones in the brand lover segment who are not paying subscribers, what is going to keep them from subscribing, and what might motivate them to subscribe? Essentially, orienting around these segments can be a really useful mechanism for, again, conducting ongoing focus groups, surveys, and the like. So once you've identified, what your users' needs are by segments, as I said, you need to specifically understand what their attitudes and behaviors are vis-a-vis these 4 categories: product and content, value-added benefits, marketing, positioning, and user experience. And then most importantly, build a value proposition that is designed with those users in mind. So we have a quick exercise that you, maybe not so quick, but an exercise that we find useful to engage with our publishers on, and frankly ask them to spend time with their editorial, marketing, and cross-functional teams as they're essentially thinking about strengthening their digital subscriptions model. Again, many of these questions are kind of basic. It's really the time and effort and frankly decision and choices that organizations make around these that differentiate this from being just another activity to one that actually drives meaningfully the strategy. So in the context of product and content, what do your readers want? What do you currently offer, and what's the gap? And then how do you essentially close that gap? The examples we've had organizations, you know, I was talking with an organization, a mid-sized news organization, you know, they've identified that their readers want a meaningful amount of local sports coverage. And, you know, they have a good amount of sports coverage, but it really, you know, only is, you know, once a week on kind of high school and college. And, you know, the readers essentially, particularly not just readers generically, but readers who have demonstrated a high willingness to pay, have indicated that they actually want daily briefings. They don't need to be deep, but email briefings on essentially what's going on during the preseason in terms of actually setting up you know, the teams and setting everyone up for success. And you know, that's a period of time, and then there are other periods of time throughout the season where they're really interested in kind of concentrated content. And so, you know, the thought is, oh, should we actually assign a reporter to cover this and create this as either subscriber only content or introduce it as part of our existing sports coverage. And again, the series of conversations that essentially organizations will need to go through lead to good and I guess productive, you know, positive relationships between ultimately recognizing what the reader wants, what they're willing to pay for, what's the journalism or experience that's needed to get that, and then communicating that actively such that you're able to get people to convert and retain on a much more active basis. So once you've developed a clear value proposition around those needs, actually, I should say there's another exercise which is built by Strategizer. This is used by Membership Puzzle Project, which is an expert in contributions and memberships. But it's a good, simple rubric for getting at how do you essentially do something, arrive at an approach that's differentiated. So our products and services help this particular user segment. You know, you could say prospective brand lovers who like sports, who want to find out more information about you know, the preseason selection process for, you know, local college football by reducing this pain, in this case, you know, by preventing them from not having this information, and by enabling their user gain. So by providing them with, you know, daily information that can help them become that much more knowledgeable about a passion point. So once you've identified your specific value proposition, the goal then is essentially to be able to create a reader revenue program that communicates this simply and powerfully. So Chronica and El Litoral were organizations that we worked with in our contributions labs in South America. They recognize that essentially, as many organizations do, what differentiates their content is this kind of orientation around, you know, journalism, which is original, you know, holds power to account. So the idea is they developed some language and they, you know, communicated it throughout all their marketing messaging and their overall, you know, brand messaging, as well as kind of subscriptions activations messaging, which was, we need the support of people to put responsible, original, and unconditional journalism into practice. It's time to help each other. So this speaks to the individual user and speaks to kind of that civic responsibility. Likewise, El Litoral had a similar language. We build El Litoral together. We are a benchmark for quality and truth, a diversity of voices, and credible, accessible information. Be part of the millions who trust our content. So there was some social signaling included in that language, be part of the millions. So you want to be part of a group. There was some indication of core value proposition, which is quality, truth, diversity, credibility, and accessibility, and obviously information. And then again, some kind of notion of responsibility for we build El Litoral together. Those are just a couple of the messages that you could approach. Others tend to be a little bit more kind of value and transaction oriented, but the most successful organizations have been really both simple in the language, make it really clear what you get, kind of from an emotional perspective, and then also really clear from a functional perspective, if you're familiar with that kind of marketing language. 5 is make it easy for readers to pay and enjoy your content. So really, this is about kind of just making, you know, making it as simple and seamless as possible, ideally one-click purchase, though of course nothing is as simple as that. I will say we have launched a product which is relevant for organizations that are kind of larger, and hopefully we'll be able to scale that further. But there are many tools out there, not just Google tools, to essentially reduce the friction. So our product is called Subscribe with Google. The goal is essentially to optimize conversion with a low friction and secure payments flow, improving engagement by keeping readers signed in across the web. And then it allows publishers to own the reader relationship with access to readers' email. You heard in the intro, Pete Doucette's objective to essentially have grow from 1% of known readers to 15% of readers. Well, one way to do that, obviously, is to ask for email addresses for newsletters and registration and the like. But again, that's super important to be able to make that experience as seamless as possible. And some of the, frankly, the lessons that we've had from our experience through labs is ask publishers to run tests to reduce the number of steps required for a user to make a purchase. What would happen if you essentially make the purchase upfront with one click, but collect a lot of the user information after the purchase is made, either within that flow or over email over a period of time. And there are trade-offs, but the general lesson is the fewer steps you ask a user to engage in, the more likely they are to actually convert. So lesson 6 is, once you've kind of developed the value proposition, understood your reader, you really need to get the entire organization focused on those unified goals. For many years, news organizations have been, as I said, focused on advertising revenue on the business side, and kind of said, okay, that's the business side's responsibility. And the newsroom is going to focus on what it does well, which is journalism. Now, reader revenue essentially creates an incentive to, frankly, have everybody in the organization, business side, newsroom, et cetera, working together to essentially create something amazing for readers such that they're willing to pay, and you're able to build a business around it, which can essentially go back into supporting the newsroom. That is a highly, I guess, complicated activity, changing the culture of news organizations, building up skills for reader centricity, product perspective, et cetera. But having ground both indications and urging from the bottom up as well as from the top down to focus on reader revenue, that really makes the whole difference. So we found the most successful partners on our lab programs, for example, have been ones that have not only had like a key champion at the kind of the middle and senior management level, or middle management level and kind of the operating level, but also have had a key champion at, frankly, the board in case of public companies, but also the CEO, to really be able to say, what, we are a reader revenue focused business, and we need to orient all of our efforts around creating an amazing experience. That's something you've seen. Again, the New York Times isn't always the most, relevant example because they are so unique and so well funded in so many ways. Having said that, there are some dimensions of their experience which I think are particularly relevant. In this case, there was essentially a report that was written by many senior executives, and including kind of championed by the publisher and CEO, which said by the year 2020, this is back in 2016, we will have achieved a certain number of, well, first of all, we are a reader revenue business. We are going to achieve a certain amount of digital revenue. I think it was $800 million. And more recently, they've said we want to generate 10 million subscriptions. Now, having kind of been part of the many decisions of the Times for many years, before that, there was always this tension between kind of print and digital, advertising and consumer revenue, and frankly, it created a lot of organizational tie-ups. When that report came out, combined with kind of an insight that said 2% of readers are generating 90% of our revenue because those people are consumer or subscribers, kind of created a real awakening within the organization that we really need to get everybody aligned on how do you understand your readers, how do you essentially create an amazing experience, and how do you essentially build your business with that in mind. And you've seen the results from the times if many organizations have made similar, or many organizations have made similar adjustments and have seen similarly great digital subscriptions growth. So the final lesson here is just, once you've kind of made that commitment, benchmark, test, and optimize. So this list of metrics is a list that we've identified with our various partners, including Mather, that suggests across the funnel, growing your audience, engaging your audience, converting your readers, and retaining your readers. These are the most important metrics to understand and prioritize. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will point you to the tool that I referenced before, which is the user funnel diagnostic. It allows you to essentially enter in, you can see here your data, this is kind of user entered, compare it to the industry benchmark, indicate kind of how well you're doing on a kind of green, yellow, red perspective, and then actually based on that you scroll down and it will tell you what are some of the recommendations you need to follow through. So page speed score, this is based on a Google tool which essentially assesses how quickly your page loads. Fortunately, the industry benchmark is 55. That is fairly low in the context of page speed in general, mobile and web. But we've known from our experience in advertising, for every 1 second improvement in page score, you have a double-digit decrease in the number of people who abandon the page. So just imagine the increases in page speed score, how that will actually improve the customer experience, willingness to pay, and obviously the reduce the likelihood of churn. So in summary, these are the lessons that we've derived from our labs and our workshops in partnership with Mather and others. One is define and understand the market opportunity, so you know what you're playing with, frankly, and what success could be. 2 is really get into deeply understanding your readers' needs, both from a quantitative and qualitative perspective, both your product, but also how they're engaging with digital news and content overall. 3 is building the value proposition around those needs. So from content to user experience and product and the like, really understand that deeply, and that takes time and one-on-one time, not just survey time. 4, communicate the reader revenue program simply and powerfully through marketing messages, and frankly, the most important message, most important mechanism, which is product, which in this case is the content and the journalism, but also the product experience. 5, make it easy for readers to pay and enjoy your content. So just optimize for a simple and seamless and quick user experience and purchase experience. 6 is focus the whole organization on this unified set of goals around reader revenue. And then finally, just benchmark, test, and optimize on an ongoing basis. So thank you. I will, there's a quick set of URLs which you can check out, g.co/GNI digital growth and goo/GLE/data tools. Which will link you to News Consumer Insights and our other companion tools, real-time content insights, as well as our data benchmarking and maturity survey. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to answer questions. I think Nikki is going to take it away from here.
I'm here. Thank you, Ben, for sharing that and for putting these links up as well. You've covered a lot of information, 7 helpful tips are strong enough for us to make sure that we're going back and looking at this afterwards, because I think it's really, really good that you've shared this. So just a reminder to our audience, you can ask questions of Ben that I can try to funnel his way by using the chat feature in the bottom of Zoom. But as you just get sort of a quick breath there, Ben, I want to start by asking a question that we had come in, which really speaks to just the size, right, of Google and you guys doing this large of a benchmarking project. With the Google News Initiative, have there been any publishers or examples that you can give of folks who have really used digital platforms in order to drive, actual print growth? So thinking about hard copies, et cetera, because we think of Google, we think of digital, and I know a lot of the data comes from that, but certainly you're working with so many publishers from around the globe that we thought there might be a good example that you might be able to share.
Yeah. So the primary, just off the top of my head, the primary use case that publishers have had for driving print growth has been through kind of Google. Well, one is a Google paid advertising, which essentially, like any organization, you can use Google AdWords or Google Display Network to essentially buy ads. And when somebody searches for the East Hampton Times, you'll have the promotion that will be upfront on the top of the Google search results. Likewise, if you've optimized your site well for Google, you should come up when people are essentially searching for that. It was and is a meaningful channel and a very cost-effective channel in general for customer subscription acquisition. So that's kind of a primary mechanism, and it does require something in the way of kind of either if you're using an agency or building that capability in-house, does require some kind of Google Ads capability and knowledge and know-how. So that's kind of the primary way that I think. The other approach, obviously, is when you're just optimized for SEO, for just news and the website in your own, you want to make sure, and this is within your own decision as opposed to Google, but making sure that you're thinking about the experience of a user coming from Google, who's going to be a more itinerant user, and think about what you're trying to do. If you want to be able to essentially optimize them to convert into a physical subscription, you can do things like make your print subscription acquisition button really prominent on the article page or the home page, or create house ads in the right rail or within the article itself to be able to drive people to subscription. So again, think about Google as both a paid and free / organic content discovery mechanism, similar to the way you might think about kind of placement on a print newsstand, and think about what are the vehicles for getting those people to actually engage with your print product and hopefully make a purchase.
Okay, great. Those are some great ideas. So thank you for sharing those. One of the things that I think is really interesting, and you hit this right from the very beginning, right, which is know what market you're actually in and defining that. And that's an exercise, quite frankly, that a lot of organizations have to go through, because I think they might know, but ultimately working through like that tool that you gave with Strategizer of kind of defining that was helpful. One of the things you mentioned was the obvious consumer and the focus there on how you fit into their overall digital diet. So describing, how much are they spending on Netflix, or are they also an Amazon subscriber, and where you fit into that. And the question I have is really around whether or not publishers and these organizations who are out there today in our audience should think of themselves as competing with Netflix and Amazon. On one side, you can make the argument that of course they could, because you're a consumer, and just because you're in a local market doesn't mean that you're not paying for that digitally. And then of course the flip side is the price point, for example, that they can set is going to be so different than what you can, because they have scale. And so how do you at Google start to think about that as a competitive set for particularly some of these local publishers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's no one answer for organizations. So the New York Times is a better position to maybe think about Netflix as a competitor, not for entertainment or movies, obviously, but again, for actually not for movies, but for just generally thinking about the way that you would spend money on digital versus a local news organization. Ultimately, anything that's coming out of a publisher's wallet or purse, a publisher user's wallet or purse on an ongoing basis needs to be kind of evaluated against all other expenses that fit within that kind of general category. If news organizations can do a good job of kind of creating a separate category for, this is about civic responsibility or community or, something that's distinctive, they create more differentiation and make it less of a substitute for Netflix. And that requires having a differentiated enough product. And I know this is a little complicated, but Netflix essentially created kind of a new category that initially was essentially about a more effective alternative to what you're spending every weekend on Blockbuster when you're going to the movie. And it was cheaper, it was more efficient, but now it's essentially bigger than that. It is essentially a competitor to your cable and your other expenses. So they kind of went from one smaller market, which was video rentals, to a bigger market, which was essentially all movies, entertainment, and television. It's also competing with broadcast. So you've got to figure out what is your relevant kind of competitive set initially, and don't be hemmed in by your traditional approach of just thinking, oh, well, I'm competing with my local newspaper, or I'm competing with my local broadcaster. You're in some ways trying to create a new category, and you have to just make sure you're creating something that's unique, distinctive, and special enough that, frankly, people are willing to pay not just $7 or $15 or whatever, but the most important step is getting somebody to pay from zero to a penny. That's the kind of biggest hurdle that many organizations face. And once you're past that, then it's essentially on you to prove out that what you're asking a user to pay for it is worth their time and money.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, thank you for that. One of the things that I was thinking about when you were showing just the Google News Initiative and how it's so important is that what it really gives us is a lot of this benchmarking data. And so going back to sort of definitions, when you were showing the chart that was almost like the mortgage calculator in a way that was a simple dashboard for people to use, you were looking at things like number of active users and the growth among them and conversion rates. And one of the things I was wondering was, do each of these publishers typically come in with different definitions for that, right? So a conversion rate could be conversion to subscription, where they start giving you that first sort of penny, or it could be conversion to giving you first party data so that you can put them into your funnel and nurture them. Or same thing with active users. Maybe some people have defined that as coming back to their site, 3 times in 1 month, where perhaps someone else is defining it very differently. So how do you reconcile that data in terms of comparison? Are you guys actually setting what the definition of active is or conversion so that you can get a little bit more apples to apples in that?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question, one that's given us a lot of headaches. Everybody has a different definition of what a user is, what an active is. I actually, as I was walking through even the definition of the segments, casual users, loyal users, and brand lovers, I think I even messed up the definition. So it is hard to get that right. We do and work really hard to kind of set standardized definitions, certainly for the approaches that we're using and the benchmarking that we're doing. But as Matt will attest on our engagements on labs, as people attest on our engagement in APAC and North America, getting publishers to essentially get and adapt their data to reach those particular definitions was really hard, because everyone uses a different definition, or maybe not different, but not everyone, but a lot of people use lots of different definitions. I think it would be an amazing thing for the industry overall to agree upon some kind of standard definitions for what some of these key variables are, such that we all do and are able to essentially do apples to apples comparison. There are a couple of things that we're working on. One is through Google, through the News Consumer Insights, we essentially released a tag, News Tag Manager, which essentially does create the same, allows you to essentially input Java code and JavaScript onto your site, such that the definitions of audience that are being captured are consistent with the kind of canonical definitions, and allows you to essentially make sure that you're having the appropriate comparisons. And then likewise, Mather is working with Medill on a kind of project to essentially get deeper into the definitions of user funnel and the like, and we're working with them on that as well, and we make our definitions available in public so that hopefully people are using the same approaches, and again can compare things apples to apples.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And yesterday I guess it was on Friday, it feels like yesterday, we had the opportunity to hear more about the initiative with Northwestern University. So that does go hand in hand, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So one of the things that I just want to wrap up with one more question is one that is really important, that was a tip that you mentioned, but I'm glad that you also said it's quite complex, because I was thinking aspirational, which was the one of unifying goals. And certainly by saying, okay, we're going to focus on reader revenue, that becomes a little bit easier, because then you take your editorial team, maybe the business side that's focused a little bit more on simplifying payments and that sort of thing, and you get them rallying around the same thing. But I guess the question that I have, and I don't know, how many people have shared this, and I'd be curious if you know this, there's data now that is available that can show, click to conversion or path to conversion, that shows some of the types of content that is really generating that. Are most of the publishers you're working with showing that kind of data to their newsrooms as part of this shift to being able to focus on, reader revenue and aligning those goals?
Yeah, I mean, there are many organizations are, well, I want to address two things. One is just the data that's being used, and then the other is differentiation between kind of data and culture. In terms of the first question, many organizations are sharing that data about kind of what articles lead to a particular conversion. That is certainly, so I gave the example of the organization I was talking to, kind of a good mid-sized city paper that's been really successful in digital subscriptions, a member of one of our labs. Talked to the publisher last week, and she was saying, oh yes, in fact, we know that sports content is really important to our conversion decision. And that is based on some of the data that they had. Mather has provided some of that for some of these organizations, but there are lots of organizations that kind of provide that technology. So many they're just very clear that that shouldn't get in the way of editorial and journalistic judgment. Editors and reporters need to be, making assessments based on their training and their experience as to what is important for their user in light of the overall mission of the organization. But data around, oh, this is actually important for subscribers or important to create a compelling value proposition to subscribers, that's information they can actually incorporate into some of their editorial decisions without, again, compromising the journalism, which should remain sacrosanct. The second part that I do want to just touch on this as the last point, which is I think it's really easy or it's really tempting, let's say, to focus on kind of data, information, et cetera, as the kind of key to unlocking value and subscription success. But time and time again, I'm just convinced it's all about the people, it's all about their commitment, and it's all about choices that we're making, not just to focus on subscriptions, but to not focus on other things. Creating, like 1 or 2 or 3 experts who really have the knowledge and are advocates for reader revenue and that capability, and having them work collaboratively, empowering them, elevating that message, and frankly, breaking the silos across all parts of the organization, newsroom, marketing, product, et cetera. That's much more effective, and it may be messy, but giving people a goal and getting them in a room and just saying, you're going to focus on this for the next 6 months, that will lead to untold and frankly unimagined outcomes that frankly are required for ongoing sustainability and success for a news organization.
Right. Okay, thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for being here and kicking off the 3rd day of our symposium. Great stuff that you have unpacked here for us. And we just appreciate you joining us and sharing everything today.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.